Hello again, everybody, and welcome to this webinar series on IHE Profiles related to FHIR, organized by HL7 Finland. This is our third installation. Our lecturer is John Moehrke. Please introduce yourself briefly and the topic for today.
Hello, thank you. So yes, my name is John Moehrke. I am a consultant with BioLite Consulting in the US, member of HL7 and IHE. Within IHE, the topic of the day, I am co-chair of the ITI Technical Committee. I didn't have direct involvement in the writing of the two profiles we're going to go through today, but as co-chair, I'm certainly aware of what they are. So look forward to discussing them. So I am going to switch to presenting using the browser because the presentations are not as mature on this. Let me switch. And I think I'll turn off my video so that it comes through just as this. So we're starting as usual on profiles.ihe.net. That is the location where IHE publishes their technical framework, the supplements, white papers, those kinds of technical artifacts. And then we're going to be discussing an IT infrastructure profile, otherwise known as implementation guide. So this is the page that has all of the things for IT infrastructure. And within the volumes, you find everything. But since what we're going through today is a trial implementation supplement, we can get more directly to it by just scrolling down to the supplements. So I'm going to start with NPFS. NPFS is the non-patient file sharing. I guess I gotta zoom in a little bit more. So non-patient files are those files that are not specific to a given patient. Some of the examples that we have in the specification are things like a style sheet. You need to manage your style sheet so that as everyone within your organization uses the style sheet, any changes to the style sheet get rather easily propagated. Things like the privacy policy. Hey, this is our base privacy policy upon which consents are built, but it's not the actual consent language, it's the privacy policy upon which the consents are built. Other things could be just graphics or maybe care guidelines, those kinds of things that are not specific to a given patient. So that's the topic of a non-patient file sharing. And it's kind of awkward, but because we started with things like MHD and XDS and XCA, which are very patient specific, we needed some way to distinguish this particular implementation guide. If I go to the introduction in volume 1, we get to see that the actors are a file manager, that thing which is managing the files, a file source, those things that would create sources or update them or modify the metadata, and consumers, which would be those things consuming. So if you have a new style sheet, you would submit file ITI87 to publish it. If you replace that, you say, hey, we've got a new file, you can do a submit ITI87, much like in MHD, to replace. So it does a functional replace. So the old one still exists, but the new one exists and is indicated as a replacement for. The update document reference we'll get into, but update document reference is when you need to just tweak some of the metadata elements. So when you published it, maybe you put a bad description, so you need to just update the description. So the update document reference is more of a way to just tweak the metadata. without submitting a whole new file. On the consuming side, you have search file, ITI 88. Certainly, it's just searching for the metadata, various search parameters and the like. From that metadata that you get back, you can choose to retrieve the specific file. So in that way, it's very much like MHD, and indeed it uses a lot of the same things as MHD. The prime true difference is that MHD requires a patient within the document reference. This one requires that the subject is not a patient. So that's functionally the difference. Now there's some more profiling that helps you with different kinds of files, but so those are the transactions. I will note that on the file consumer, you can search for files, and there is an option to indicate that you'll also be retrieving them. And this was in order to enable things that are just doing maintenance. So you search on the files in order to do an update. So that's within the options. That's why we have these two options. They're really not that critical, but it enables each of the actor to be as lightweight as possible. So I'm going to just kind of scroll through some of the use cases. We're not going to spend a lot of time in this particular implementation guide because it is quite simple. But the first one is just talking about style sheets, and we've defined some vocabulary to identify a style sheet. We've explained, that there's some profiling going on there. So there is some profiling behind this, but essentially you can see you would submit your style sheet, you would register it, so to speak, and you would do that through a transaction bundle that has a document reference in it and a binary in it. And that would then, just like MHD does, it would register into the FHIR server. The FHIR file manager is a FHIR server. It would register into the file manager the document reference and the binary and the linkage between them. On the right-hand side, you see a file consumer that has received some kind of a laboratory report off on the right-hand side. It's a CDA document, so it says, gee, I need to get the style sheet for displaying this CDA document. So it searches using ITI 88 to find style sheets, and it knows the author or some other pieces of information. So it can search and find a document reference. It notices that there's only one in this example, so it just goes ahead and does then a retrieve of that. Once you have the style sheet, it's up to your application to apply the style sheet to the CDA document. But essentially, you can see how this is useful to share style sheets within some kind of a domain. Could be an organization, could be an HIE, could be bigger than that. But that's the first use case that's in here. The next one is kind of saying, hey, if you have a document already that exists, let's just say there's a privacy policy and some new regulations come down which require you to change your privacy policy. So now I need to distribute what is our current privacy policy versus the previous one. Well, the previous one you want to keep around, but you want to indicate that it has been replaced. So that's where this you do the same kind of submit of the document reference and the binary with the new policy, and it's an indication that this is a replacement for the previous one. So anybody who has used the previous one can now see that the document reference indicates that, oh, it's still there, but it's been deprecated and it's been replaced by. So on the right-hand side, you see someone is querying for a privacy policy. This is kind of showing the ability to do the updates. And then, I'm not sure this one really adds much, but essentially, there's some other cases where You have submitted some documents, but you want to change something just in the document reference. So we'd use the ITI 89 to do that. There's not a lot in the security considerations because they're not patient specific, and we kind of expect that you understand the files you're putting up there. So if they're still sensitive, like business sensitive, you still have to worry about that, but it is a little bit different in that you don't need to have as important there. So just going to jump quickly into just one of the transactions just to show you the transaction flow. So submit file, like I said, it's very similar to an MHD, provide and register. So you can do creates and updates and deletes, but essentially the semantics are you're submitting a bundle that has a binary, the file, and has a document reference, the metadata about the file that's used for discovery. And you can include other things. You're allowed to do that. But essentially that's it. It's just a one file post of a bundle. So that's all that I really was going to go into around NPFS. It's rather simple, and so if we go back out to the ITI domain, we can then go into mCSD.
Before we do, there is a question in the chat from Kari.
Thank you.
Saying,
Yeah.
I guess non-patient part excludes also documents applying to a group of patients, or does it depend on whether the patient's document is about the document is about can be identified or not?
Yeah. One, we don't in IHE really have anything around group. And the NPFS does require that the subject element is empty. So you couldn't use a group there. So if you're going to actually use group, you would need to create a variant that's neither NPFS nor MHD. It's certainly a good use case. It's certainly something that's needed, but it's not something that has been brought to IHE to profile the use of FHIR. That could be a good new work item that could be proposed. When it comes to the question of de-identified data, often de-identified data is still going to need to have a subject to knit together all of the data that's associated with this de-identified identity. So I would tend to still use MHD, but just tag the data that you're publishing in MHD as having been de-identified. So there are security tags that you would use in the meta security to indicate that it is de-identified data, and that can de-identified patient. So you'd have a new patient resource that is tagged as de-identified, carries along with it the needed information. So oftentimes de-identified data, you need to know the age of the patient. So you would fuzz the actual birth date, and maybe you just put in month and year into the birthday of that specific patient resource, but you would have a patient resource. Good questions. Thank you.
I have another one. Do you have any view on which kind of products would use this kind of profile, and whether are there products available that claim conformance to this? Has it been tested in IHE connectathons, any of that part?
I did not do that research. Maybe I need to start doing that research before coming to these. The intended use are I mean, with NPFS, I would expect more that the, excuse me, let me bring up the actor transaction table again. I would expect, well, first off, file managers should just need to be a FHIR server. So, that wouldn't be necessarily a product, but it could be. The file source, I would think there's going to be a few administrative tools that would do this, and quite possibly you could group these two together and not really have to do a app. The file consumer is the one that we really vision applications need to do. So like the use case here, where you're saying, hey, I have a style sheet need, so I have some kind of a maybe an EHR portal or what have you that is receiving lab reports and needs to be able to display these CDA documents. So I kind of see the file consumer as being the thing that is more healthcare specific. So to receive style sheets, in the case of consents, maybe the consent, the application that's used to get a consent from a patient. The patient wants to display, hey, I want to actually read this privacy policy. So, well, off we go to read that privacy policy. So I think the file consumer is more likely an actor that's integrated into some broader functionality, whereas the file manager and the file source are probably just off-the-shelf FHIR tools.
Yeah, but still FHIR tools. When I was thinking of this, I thought this is kind of basic asset management. Does it need a healthcare specific standard? And then I thought that, okay, for instance, EHRs in a hospital system might want to talk to a more generic asset management solution that hosts the style sheets and the graphics that are, for instance, also visible in the web page of that hospital system. That's
Right.
not healthcare specific, but the EHR is. And then the EHR would need to know how to talk to there.
And yeah, and to that point, this functionality that NPFS provides, can be provided by all kinds of things. Google Docs, it doesn't use FHIR to do the metadata, but it has some kind of, file metadata that you can search on. So I'm not saying that this is an awfully compelling profile, but if you have a FHIR server and you have applications that are using FHIR, which is really this consuming side, then wouldn't it be, nice to have them just use FHIR rather than use FHIR and, also have instrumentation for Google Docs. So, there is that kind of question. And further, where the document is, kind of like with MHD, maybe the document itself exists in Google Docs, and the document reference is really just an embellishment of a Google Docs, and just to pick on Google Docs. I'm not saying I would endorse it, but so I think the more likely healthcare applications that are using this are going to be in the file consuming side.
Yeah. Right. Thanks for that.
Okay. All right. So the next up is the mCSD. So mCSD is the Mobile Care Services Discovery. So this is a FHIR implementation guide as well. So we go to the introduction. As I pointed out before, IHE is just has a templating that has the use cases described in volume 1, and the volume 2 has the transactions. Volume 3 isn't used in this one, but volume 3 would be where content is defined. And so we have these various layouts of all of our implementation guides. And then within here, of course, there's the usual breakdown. So mobile care services discovery. This is a mobile profile. So we had prior to this care services discovery, which was based on a LDAP variant. And we also had HPD, which is also based on an LDAP variant. Those had two different functional use cases. And we actually had PWP, which is also based on LDAP variants. So we had those three. And when people were asking for a FHIR equivalent, we ended up just taking on one of the names, Care Services Discovery, but we really pulled in all of the use cases. So reminder, IHE, we use the mobile term not to say it's only useful by mobile devices, but to say that this is a reimagined use case from our past, where back then FHIR didn't exist, and therefore we chose a different appropriate standard like LDAP, because IHE can choose the best standard available at the time. But we're reimagining it in a world in which the requirements are lighter weight, therefore HTTP REST, and therefore FHIR falls into it nicely. So the mobile isn't intended to be a constraint on use, it's a constraint on choosing standard. So we choose FHIR in this case. Right off the bat, there are at least two white papers that I'm going to refer to, and I'll point to them at the end. But right away, this one, starts off with an mCSD white paper that talks through what I just did, which is, kind of the history of how did we get to mobile care service discovery, and how did we get all of these use cases involved. So mobile care services discovery is looking to support things. Well, you'll see the use cases, but kind of give a short. It's trying to deal with the use cases of organizing organizations and sub-organizations like departments, facilities and locations, and endpoints. So we have this idea that there's a set of use cases where I need to be able to within a domain find all of the dermatologists, those kinds of questions, or within a health information exchange, given this particular patient identity domain, where's the endpoint that I do a query to get information on this patient identity domain? So those are some of the use cases. So as it exists, we have a set of concepts that are managed in here. Organizations are entities that are administrative bodies. So it could be an HIE, it could be a technical organization, it could be a department. So there's sub-organizations that are also identified as organizations. Those sub-organizations do have a relationship to their hosting organization. So there is that kind of a relationship. Facilities are physical care deliveries that have a particular geographic. So they're kind of a location, but they're a location that's paired with an organization to be very clearly specific to a facility. Whereas locations are just physical places. So locations can be things like a mobile mobile van that is moving, those kinds of things. Jurisdictions is a class of an organization paired with a location that is used to create a boundary condition. And then practitioners are health workers. Most of the time it's clinicians, but really health workers include things like nurses and pharmacists and even, health district health workers. In our context, we don't really have use cases for things like janitors, but of course, practitioners can be things like janitors. But in this here, we don't really have those use cases. It's not that we would reject it, but we're focusing more on care service delivery. So those who would be, delivering some kind of care. And then a health service is a kind of health service. So things like surgical services or primary care, like I said before, dermatology, those kinds of things. And then endpoint is a technical endpoint. And in here, we deal with endpoints that are FHIR, but we also deal in here with endpoints that are not FHIR. So things like an XDS endpoint or things like a security endpoint. And then organization affiliation has been added in the last iteration of this to deal with the fact that there are intermediaries that have a relationship with many delivery networks, but the intermediary is just an affiliation relationship. So it's not this sub-organization is a member of is a sub-organization of this primary organization. It's a business relationship, so there's some affiliation. The affiliation is described. So these are the abstract concepts that are being orchestrated within mCSD, and there's quite a few variations on how you organize these based on the kinds of things you need to do. So I'll get to that, and that those variations are more the topic of the white papers that I'll point at, and we won't really be able to touch upon, but those variations are kind of described more in the white paper than in here. So the actors and transactions are very simple. It may seem like all of a sudden you go from something that's rather complex, as in the abstract data model, and then all of a sudden you have simple actors and transactions. Well, this is the beauty of REST, right? So you have the actors are essentially client and server, but they're broken down into those who are consuming directly, doing a direct query, versus those who are registering that they want to know about updates. So that's kind of the breakdown there. So there isn't a administrative side within mCSD like you saw in the NPFS. It's kind of assumed that the data source is administratively managed. There has been some discussion, but there hasn't been enough interest to bring it together, primarily because it would just be RESTful create and update and delete. The more important part is the profiling of these various data into profiles. So the profiles are there. There's just not necessarily a transaction. All right. So if we go into, I think the next thing, so there's one option, this location distance option. One of the use cases, or one attribute of some of the use cases, specifically things like a consumer, a patient wanting to find dermatologist near me. I don't want all the dermatologists in Wisconsin where I live. I just want those dermatologists that are within 50 miles of me. Um, uh, so we have this distance option, which enables, which if enabled, you can add to your queries a location distance parameters, and the servers that support that can use those geolocations to further refine the results returned. And this is not defined how the server does this. It still is, application magic on how the server does it. The option enables the parameter to be understood and used versus if the option is not declared, well, you can provide the parameter, but the server doesn't have to honor it at all. So this option is useful as a parameter of, hey, I need my servers to support this location distance option. Oh, okay. That's a heavier lift. We have to implement that capability because it includes things like dealing with trying to figure out the distance, um, and that can be specifically uh, difficult when you're dealing with, well, is it road distance or is it straight line distance? Those kinds of parameters that we have to, it would be application specific features. All right. So this is our diagram, and I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit just to get it on the page. Um, So this is our diagram that takes those original abstract concepts up above and puts them in a relationship. So you can kind of see the relationships here. Organization is kind of the central point of mCSD because it is, even if all you have is a directory that has organizations, facilities, locations, and practitioners. So this is just a directory that allows me to find dermatologists. I still need these for relationships. Whereas if I add to that there is a FHIR server where I can register an appointment with, well, then I need endpoints to be available. So you can kind of see the things that you bring together are going to be specific to the use cases. You wouldn't necessarily need to have affiliations or jurisdictions unless you needed affiliations and jurisdictions. And I'll get into a little bit of a discussion about, well, why would I use affiliation at all, and the like. So these are the relationships that are supported by the transactions. So when you do a create or an update on a resource, these relationships are the relationships you're allowed to have, and the checking within the profiling is there for it. But it's also important to see that if I want to know, if the dermatologist, so I search on a service dermatology, this dermatology is at a particular facility, and these practitioners work at that facility. I now can see, oh, that's how I would find the practitioners. Now I can reverse look through this provides pointer as well. So you can kind of see all of the variations. It's just whether you are going in a direct reference. So services have references to facilities. Practitioners have references to services. And actually, I'm pretty sure this is practitioner role in the actual technical. So this is still an abstraction. So like affiliation is actually organization affiliation. So there's some things that when I first looked at this, I was starting to wonder again yesterday. So this is here to help the reader understand how they would traverse the various concept domains. So first use case is the one I've been kind of dealing with is, some patient has some kind of a problem. Hey, my knee hurts, and they get a diagnosis from their doctor that it's a torn ACL, and they're told to, find an orthopedic surgeon within 30 kilometers of their home. So they can query the directory for, hey, who is available as an orthopedic surgeon within 30 kilometers of home. So you get these matches, you can resolve references, and you can then go off to a different profile we have for checking office hours. But you would do that through, from here, you find the practitioner role. From there, you can find the locations, and from there, you can find the endpoints, which would be the FHIR endpoints that would have the office hours available. So a rather simple use case, but it's an important use case. As you can see, just simply having a directory that only has what services are available, what region are those available, and who provides those services at those locations. So again, if we go back to this, you can see that you're really only using, part of this diagram. You don't actually need all of the diagram to support that kind of a use case. And that's kind of the importance of taking your use case and evaluating that into the need. So provider lookup for oh yeah, that's right. This is I had this figured out. Oh, okay. So yeah, so this is a disaster use case. So in a national disaster or what have you, emergency people who have skills come to help out. Those people who have skills didn't exist in that region before. So, how do you track who was authorized by the leadership that are dealing with the disaster recovery, and who is just kind of somebody saying that they are? So this use case kind of says, well, hey, as a directory, I can very quickly update the directory with people who show up and prove that they are useful providers of care for this emergency. Maybe they're just workers who can move sandbags, but maybe they are EMTs. So I can very quickly update the directory. Is this use case? It indicates I can very quickly update the directory, maybe pull down information from a national directory. But that then enables volunteers who are helping out to be able to say, hey, give me your identity. You can look up the identity. You can confirm that. So this is just kind of saying, a directory can be as more agile when you have that kind of a case. This third use case is kind of getting into more of these more difficult use cases, and I'm not sure I'll be able to cover them as well as they probably deserve. But the idea of this one is it's saying, hey, there are in this case regions that have a relationship to a organizing region. In this case, these are health information exchanges. So you can imagine down here you've got various health information exchanges. They might be XDS domains, just to use IHE XDS. They might be just federated by XCA, but you need a directory that can show the overall organization of the XCA world. So XCA is integrating, in this case, 2, but could be integrating 20 different domains. So how do you show this relationship? And so this is kind of talking through how we can do that particular relationship. Based on, wait a minute, uniquely. Okay, I'm trying to remember this one. Master facility, maybe it's. Okay, so this is rather similar to the previous. It's just looking more at facility usage. So I think this one is covering the fact that a particular location can be used by multiple sub-organizations that are quite possibly not affiliated. So it's not uncommon in some areas to have a physical clinic that has has a dental capability, has has an eye care capability, has a general. Those three are not really affiliated with each other, but they're using the same facilities. So this enables you to deal with those kinds of relationships of using the same facility, but not really that facility being owned by, in this case, maybe even any one of those particular sub-organizations. Once we get up into case 5, we're getting up into things where we're bringing in this organization affiliation. This is bringing in things like a health information exchange organization, which is acting on behalf of the set of organizations inside of that domain. And therefore, we use this organization affiliation resource to show relationships that are not owning organizations. The organization resource does have a participating organization concept, but it's a ownership relationship. So the organization affiliation provides the ability to say, well, there is an affiliation. It's this kind of reason, but it's not a member. It's not a ownership relationship. So we do, once you get into this, the white papers become far more important to understand what's going on there. And I'll point out there's a Federation white paper that deals with this. The last one, I think this is the last one in here, is really recognizing that we started the use case with a patient that wants to find a surgical service. A very different use of the mCSD directory is some health information exchange that needs to manage and make available to its partners what are the technical endpoints. So managing certificates, managing IP addresses of the XDS or XCA or MHD endpoints. So in this way, what this use case is focusing on is more, I have an organization, it has different capabilities. Those capabilities have specific technical endpoints. So I can find, I can find a let's start with the use case I mentioned earlier. I do a patient identity search through CPD, so a federation of patient identity searches, and I get 4 patient identities in 4 totally different identity domains, right? Because they're 4 different locations. The identity domains, I could take those domains and say, hey, in this directory, who has patient identity domain 1, 2, 3, 4? Who has patient identity domain 3, 4, 5, 6? I'll get back these organization definitions, and from those I can say, okay, now I need a XCA endpoint, or I need an MHD endpoint, or I need a some other kind of an endpoint. So I can then look through the endpoints offered and choose the specific endpoint for the need I have. So this is really saying endpoint, you can have various endpoints at an organization, and that those endpoints will have different reasons to exist. In this case, both of these are XCA, which I would have thought one would have been, a FHIR endpoint, but so you that way you can look through the endpoints available and find that. And that way, this mechanism itself can be used to make available a FHIR infrastructure. So everybody has their FHIR server. None of them are, intermediated, but the directory says, hey, if you want to know something about patients in identity domain 1, 2, 3, 4, here is the FHIR endpoint, and here are the security requirements. So in this way, you can create a network of FHIR services. This here is speaking to XCA endpoints, which are more important dealing with things like what are the certificates and those kinds of things. But all of that is available with the endpoint resource. There is a discussion in here on deployment considerations. There is a discussion in here on endpoint considerations. I think if I go back up to the top, there is, nope, there isn't. It doesn't actually refer to the Federation white paper. So what I'm going to do next is just jump over back to the IT infrastructure domain page. And if you go all the way to the bottom, there's these white papers. And the first one that was mentioned in the IG was this one here, which just describes high level, how did we come upon that set of use cases. And it's a little bit more narrative discussion than we would typically include in a volume 1, but it's kind of a volume 1 plus, so to speak. And then we added this white paper to deal with when you're using an mCSD to deal with various network topologies. So this is a white paper that goes through, well, if you want a centralized document sharing environment, here's how mCSD would look like. If you want a disconnected or a disjointed, this is how you would do it. If you want to just do point-to-point sharing, this is how. So these have various network topologies written up in this white paper, all using the same implementation guide, mCSD. So if you've got some topologies that are you're kind of trying to figure out, well, how would we manage the directory that says, hey, these are the organizations and these are the relationships, these are the technical services, or these are the endpoints, how would I use? So the topologies is more focused on the endpoint use of mCSD than the clinical services provided. But that's because it's more focused on network topologies. So with that, I think we're, approaching the end. So I got to kind of leave a little bit of room for some questions.
Thank you. Very interesting. We do have some questions. Kari asked in chat, what sort of search parameters are used, or better to say, minimally required to be supported for mCSD? Is there option to directly disclose something about the patient's health problem that is the target for discovery of care?
Well, this is just looking for kinds of services, so it's not really patient specific, but it's a good question. So the question asked would be within this ITI 90 as to what parameters. So these are the required parameters on organization. These are the required parameters on location. These are the parameters on practitioner. So you can see we've got different parameters on each resource type. And then, of course, this is one particular way to read that, but I do believe, well, maybe we have not republished. Yeah, we do have capability statements, but this was published in 22. So the IG publisher doesn't display capability statements well. But the capability statements that IG publisher has. So actually one of the things I have already put in as a improvement opportunity is just simply republish this with the new IG publisher. But within here, you can look at the capability statement. One of the other, since we're talking about the capability statements here, one of the things we have received as an input is our capability statements list all of the parameters and make it difficult for a regional domain to derive off of mCSD and restrict the parameters in their domain because their use cases don't require the capability. So that is one of the interesting realities of capability statements that we need to work through yet. But since it was asked, so yeah, within here is the parameterization. And these are based on use case analysis. Oftentimes we're more liberal. We'll bring in a parameter if it seems like in consensus discussions that it would be needed.
Good, thank you. This was also for me an interesting profile. We do have in Finland the kind of social healthcare provider directory, and it has nice APIs. So I've built a simple tool to convert that API into FHIR1, so you can search for organizations. And my main objective there was just to build a hierarchy and select, okay, if you're living here, then these are the providers close to you, but I didn't know of the location parameter here. And would need to check that more closely. And as you said, it might be the time to drive or distance to walk or whatever parameter, how easy it is to reach through public transportation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, or if I were to say within 100 miles of my current location, I might get locations in Michigan, across Lake Michigan, that if it was direct line, and there's no way that that's near, right? So yeah, also
depends
have to deal
on your speedboat.
Yeah. It's like, no, I'd have to drive all the way down to Chicago and back up. Nope, can't do that. So, all right.
Interesting problems there. And also the office hours. So give me a location that I can reach if I leave in 20 minutes and all of that. And of course, there are plenty of different use cases for that. And that's my second question. If I would be, as an app developer, doing a really nice app that tries to do all of that for you, how would that app find different endpoints in different countries, let's say? Where would I ask for this information to be present? Do you have that kind of really high level federation use case in mind?
Yeah, so that's kind of more one of the topics that is more, surmised, so to speak, in this topologies white paper. In that, it's hard for us in IHE to declare you must have your regional directories federate into a national directory in this one particular way. So we talk about a few topologies on how to do that. Historically, with some of the predecessors, the HPD, there was this mechanism of regional directories. When they get updates, how would they feed those updates to the center? With something like FHIR, feeding updates using a subscription to the center is a possibility. It's not profiled in here, but that then gives you a master directory in the center that knows all and is now a potential bottleneck. So it's not clear what the right answer is as you start to get to national or multinational topologies. We do try to touch upon it and provide a few answers, but we don't declare the answer.
Yeah, and it might even be just some grassroots movement, somebody putting together a list of endpoints.
Yeah, in some of these cases where different regions are going to have different decisions as to what they want to do, it doesn't benefit to go to a standards organization to get your one-off looked at. But yeah.
Yeah, we are approaching the reserved time, but Kari had another question still related to the NPFS. So would the access to medication product registry or some other background master data source qualify as a use case for NPFS? As these are not necessarily document or file storage based as such.
Well, yeah, if you're distributing a spreadsheet, a comma separated file, I think NPFS would work. But if you're going to be putting that information into a FHIR format, medication, forget what the word is. But yeah, if you're going to use FHIR, then NPFS wouldn't be, the way you would do that through more of a FHIR directory. But if you just have, like a comma separated file, or you've got some other, any MIME type, NPFS can deal with. In fact, arguably you could distribute the things like code systems and concept maps as FHIR MIME types through NPFS. I guess possibly that's a way to distribute them. It wouldn't be the live database query, but you could distribute it that way, sure.
Yeah. Do you have a few minutes if we run over?
I have a few. I have a meeting in 10 minutes.
Anssi, be quick. One question for you. I don't hear you. No.
Let's take my question later.
Okay.
Okay.
We can continue in Zulip.
Yes, sure.
Thanks again, and we will have more of these in HL7.FI/IHE-FHIR.
Yep.
So the next one is October 31st. Thank you for this one, and See you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care all.